You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, and thanks for sticking with the show. This is Mighty Blue, or Steve Adams, and you are listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. The show is normally all about hikers and the effect that long-distance trails generally, and the Appalachian Trail more usually, have had on the hiker's life. With our current health situation, I thought it was important that I also give you some perspectives or opinions about hiking in this time of crisis. So while the show will continue to have our normal main guests and will continue to have a reading from a book at the end, I'm going to be adding additional stuff that may have relevance to you at this time. Today's guest, Paul Collins, is also a listener. Paul wrote to me, and once I read his trail name, which is Skunkape, I naturally wanted him on the show. But there is so much more to Paul's story than his name, and he'll be along soon. As the last item in today's show, Grandma Gatewood's fascinating ramble up the east coast of America in 1955 will continue, as our heroine reaches the traditional halfway point of the trail at Harper's Ferry. In between these two treats, I have an old friend back on the show, with Dr. Lynne Savino sharing some news and information with us that we can all use. Before Lynne, though, my fellow Hiking Radio Network podcasters and I, Julie Jester Gayheart and Anna Mudbutt Huthmaker, talk about the trail in relation to the virus. We're not trying to be controversial, and hopefully you'll find our chat interesting and nuanced. Before all that, though, let's hear from this week's main guest, Paul Skunkape Collins. Here's Paul. So I'd like to introduce you all to another listener of the show. This is Paul Collins, and of course, this name is why I really wanted him on the show, Skunkape. Hi, Paul. How are you?
Hey, how you doing, Mighty Blue?
I'm good, thanks. Well, firstly, thanks for listening to the show. But let's get the name out of the way first. And why on earth did you accept it? Because you can turn them down, you know.
Well, I actually gave myself the name.
Oh, right.
Being from Florida, down here, that's what we call the Florida Bigfoot, is the skunk ape. It's defined, the definition of the skunk ape is a hairy bipedal creature that wanders around the woods and emits a putrid odor. So it's pretty much describing a thru hiker as well. Exactly.
Yeah. Check. Love it. That's fantastic. When you gave yourself that name, I really like it. Now, you hiked the AT in 2012, and in the email that you wrote me, you told me that, you know, like a lot of my guests and some of my listeners who have done the trail, you still get post-trail depression 8 years later. How does that manifest itself now, all those years later?
I mean, it's kind of weird. I mean, the best way to describe it is, I mean, you've asked a lot of the past guests and stuff like that, you know, about homesickness while they're
Sure.
out on the trail.
Sure.
I mean, that's the best way that I can describe it. Is I never really felt that while I was out hiking the trail, because, you know, I'd call and talk to my family and stuff like that. So I didn't really feel the homesickness while out there.
Right.
But being off the trail, whenever, you know, I see videos or, you know, see posts on social media of other people that are, you know, currently out on the trail or whatnot, I actually feel that sense of homesickness from not being out on the trail.
Your homesickness isn't for home. Your homesickness is actually for the trail.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I get that depression. It's almost like a loneliness of not being out there.
Wow. That's, you know, I think we all deal with it differently. So one way to obviously deal with it is to stop looking at YouTube videos and pictures.
Oh, no, I love it too much.
Yeah. Do you get the same feeling? Do you get the same feeling as I do? When I start watching it, especially as I did it recently as well, it takes me back to that place that I was when I was in that very situation. Do you find that as well?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I see the videos, see the different places, and I can remember, being there just like it was, yesterday and whatnot. Same with,
Yeah.
like my journal that I kept every day whenever I'd get to camp. I'd pull up my phone. I had an app on there that I'd keep a daily journal.
Wow. In 2012, did you? Yeah.
Yep. Whenever I read those journals each day, it's just like I was there. I can remember it almost, in 100% detail, of what was happening and everything else.
Yeah, I can understand that. And funny enough, it does show the power of the written word, doesn't it? I always say to people, make sure you write this down, because in some ways the individual days can kind of merge into one. But if you've got it written down with a little bit of detail from that day, that will take you right back there, won't it?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't, fully remember, what states, certain things were in and stuff like that, because I looked at it as almost like a really long day hike, different days of day hikes.
Yes.
That way, because I'd heard a lot of people talking about the Virginia blues and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to get that. So each day it was, like a new hike, for me. Plus also, before I actually got out on the trail, that's when I started, doing, trying to do some research and stuff like that.
Sure.
On, what to take and everything. Cause I'd done, camping and, short day hikes and stuff, but never an extensive, long hike, like the AT.
Yeah.
And, so I started watching videos, watched the documentary. What was it?
Was that the National Geographic one, the 50 odd minute one? Yeah.
Yep. I saw that one. And then, I came across, the one that I liked the best it's called Appalachian Impressions.
Right.
It was by a guy that had formerly through hiked it named Mark Flagler.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very good one, actually one of my favorite ones, because it, shows the good and the bad, days of the trail.
They weren't all great, were they?
Oh no! Oh God, no! No, not at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
The most miserable, which it showed on the video also, was, the hiking in the cold and the rain and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I remember my longest day on the trail was 35 and a half miles, and that was in the rain all day.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, so it was kind of miserable that day.
Yeah.
But
it's 35 miles. Yeah.
Yeah. I made it through it though.
Let's take it back now. You're in your mid 40s. I think you're in your mid 40s now, and so you were late 30s back in 2012. That's quite an unusual time of life to head out to the trail, isn't it? Because people either go when they're younger or when they're older, like me.
Right.
How were you able to put your life on hold back then?
Well, I work construction. I'm an electrician by trade. A lot of times around the first of the year, work slows down and whatnot. Well, sure. I'd been saving to one day try and do the trip.
Right.
Wasn't sure if I was ever actually going to be able to or not, but I figured I'd start saving just in case. Well, at the end of 2011, work slowed down.
Sure.
And me and several others got laid off from work. So, I basically looked at that as being a sign that it was, time to do the trail. I didn't have to quit a good job or anything like that. I already had money saved up.
But in many ways, though, Paul, doesn't it strike you, and it brings us actually back to today for a second, all these people who have been on the trail this year, and now you've got this coronavirus thing and more parts of the trail shutting down, how desperate that must be for them, because they've planned this for years and years. And, it isn't easy to put your life on hold to do this. So a lot of the things they've done, some people have sold everything that they've got to come and do this, and they're being told it's all over or it should be all over. Can you imagine what they must have felt? Because, the window opened for you as the window opened for me, and you decide to go through it or you decide not to go through it. We both went through it, and these people this year have gone through it, and yet at the same time they've been told they can't follow their dream anymore. That must be horrendous for them, mustn't it?
I'm sure it is. I mean, especially, since I've already done it, and the way that I feel, towards the trail and stuff like that, I mean, it would probably, if I had tried to do it again, hike the trail this year, I mean, it probably would have dang near killed me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just.
I feel so much empathy for them, and I think those of us who have done it probably feel it even more keenly than others. Think, well, it's just a hike, get off the trail, you do it another time. Well, some people just can't do it another time. So I think it's really sad. Now, did you meet many people of your age that year, by the way? Because I know that when I went in 2014, first time, I met very, very few people of that age. Your age.
Yeah, no, most everybody, like you were saying earlier, was either out of high school, getting ready to go into college, or older, like retired, retiring age or whatnot. I mean, I met a lot of great people out there.
Yeah, doesn't matter. The age doesn't matter, does it? That's the other thing that people
it don't.
They think they would gravitate to their own age, but they don't, do they? People would just all get into a shelter and just mix and get on with each other, don't they?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I love so much about the trail. It don't matter your age, don't matter whether you're male or female, it don't matter color, it don't matter what your job is.
Sure.
In real life, when you're out there on the trail, everybody is equal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody's the same. Everybody's going after that same goal and everything else.
But what actually drew you there in the first place? You told me the opportunity came, but you said you've been saving for it. So you must have thought about this for some time. What was it that made you think to yourself, this is something I want to do?
Well, I mean, I love the outdoors anyhow.
Uh-huh.
I always loved hiking, camping, all that. From the time I was little, my great uncle, he used to take me out, camping and all that all the time. And whenever I was, whenever I was a kid, probably about 8 or 9, my mom and my sisters and I went on a vacation, and we went up through the Shenandoah.
Right.
And I remember stopping at, a lot of the overlooks, and I remember seeing the AT, the sign and stuff like that, going down into the trails.
Yeah.
And, I remember asking my mom, what that was. And, she had told me that it was a hiking trail. Of course, back then I didn't know the extent of the hiking trail, that it was, over 2,000 miles long. I just thought it'd be neat to go out and hike and, camp in the woods for a while.
Yeah.
So, I had it in the back of my mind from, being a kid.
Right.
And then just throughout the years, different people would bring up, something about the AT or, whatnot, which would kick it back up in my mind and whatnot. So,
yeah. And then you got the chance, which is fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
So you got out there. So how were those early miles for you? You said you hadn't done much overnighting before, had you?
No, I mean, not as far as hiking. I mean, I'd go out camping for the weekend or something like that. But as far as actual hiking and stuff on a daily basis, no, I'd never done anything. Whenever I first started, I'd done the approach trail as well.
Right.
And so, I mean, it took me like 2 days to get to Springer, just on the approach trail. So
really,
whenever I first started, I was only doing, like 5-6 miles, a day. If I was, if I was lucky. I had tried conditioning myself, prior to get on the trail. By going down to the gym, people would look at me like I was crazy. But I'd take my pack, my fully loaded pack, down to the gym and put it on and jump on the treadmill. But that was the most I could do, down in Florida. It's not like we have, many hills down this way, that we can practice on.
That's right. But did you quickly find that the rhythm of the hike suited you? We've talked about this so many times in the past about how the hike gets into a rhythm, doesn't it? Did you find yourself getting into that pretty quickly?
Yeah. I mean, it took me probably about a good couple of weeks, before pretty much my body was physically able to do it. And, that's from then on is pretty much just, more of a mental aspect than a physical.
Yeah, just keep going. And did you team up with anybody, or were you pretty much by yourself a lot of the time?
Well, up until Albert Mountain, I pretty much hiked by myself.
Isn't Albert Mountain mile 100? I think I seem to remember it was when I
went. I think it's like
exactly 100 miles.
Yeah, it's like 100, 100.1. It's right there at 100.
Yeah.
I'd seen, the same people, each day, but never really hiked with, the same people.
Yeah.
Up until, Albert Mountain. And then I'd stopped to go up on the into the fire tower and get a few pictures and stuff like that. And
Sure.
there was one of my good friends now, since being off the trail. His
Sure.
trail name was Lee Bob. Him and I hiked together, from there to Annapolis Rocks. So, a little over 1,000 miles.
Wow.
Then he ended up getting off the trail. I think he was, getting a little homesick and whatnot. So he got off and I continued on.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. What did it feel like to lose somebody with whom you'd shared so much? Because 1,000 miles is a heck of a long way to share with somebody, because you
Oh,
do have to
yeah.
change it. You have to change your hike to adjust to that person, don't you? And I know that when Trigger and I split up for a couple of days last year, I found the whole hike to be different, not better or worse, just different. And mind you, after a couple of days, I was happy to meet up with him again. How was it for you when you suddenly realized he was gone?
it was kind of lonely. I mean, because you get so used to being able to get to camps and or the shelters
Yeah.
or whatnot, and talking. I mean, you literally become family out there, and it was like a family member just moved away, and
Yes.
you're not
Yes.
going to see them anymore or whatnot. But yeah, so I mean, it took a several days to adjust back to being by myself again
Yeah.
after that.
So did you finish by yourself, or did you summit with a group? Or were you back with a group of other people then?
I mean, I had caught back up with some of the other of my trail family and whatnot,
All
but
right. Right.
we might have hiked together for a couple of days or whatnot. But no, I ended up summiting by myself. I got up there. There was a couple of others that showed up not long after me,
Sure.
but I actually got up at 2 o'clock in the morning and
Oh my gosh.
started to stomach Katahdin, which is a weird reason why, but
Well, go on, tell
two
me.
o'clock 2 o'clock is the earliest that they will allow you to start summoning.
All
But
right.
I had heard that in the United States that the top of Mount Katahdin was the first thing that the sun
That's right.
hit whenever it rose over the
United
horizon.
States. That's right. Yeah.
So I thought it would be neat to be up there and be the first thing that the sun hit, when it came up in
Yes.
the morning,
What a great idea. So what time did you get
So,
up there then? What time did you get up there?
Well, I started at 2, and so I mean, it probably took me about 3.5 hours to get up to the top.
Right. And was it a decent day that day?
Oh yeah, it was a beautiful day. Had gorgeous views.
It would be shocking if there was no sun, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I know. I know.
It hadn't come up. Terrible, yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been as good.
I don't know about you, but I've now summited it twice and both time with friends. I've got to tell you, for me, I love sharing that moment with somebody, with whom I've spent a lot of time. What did it feel like when you were there? Were you sad that it was over, or were you glad to get back to real life, or were you, how did you feel?
It was. I mean, I think every emotion that you could possibly have, comes into you at the same time. I mean, you have the sadness that it's done. You have the happiness that it's done. And you don't have to walk anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really I guess almost like a surreal feeling that you just don't know what to do next at that point, because you've done the same thing for so long,
Yes.
day after
Yeah.
day. I mean, I remember, whenever I came back down, Katahdin, I actually lucked out because I know the ranger there that, just before you summit Katahdin and whatnot,
Uh-huh.
I was talking to her, about, how to get into, Bangor and all that. And she's
Sure.
like, well, you have to hitch a ride into Millinocket and then, take a bus or something to Bangor and all this. Well, whenever I came down Katahdin, I was down by the shelters and just started, hitching. And it was like the second car that passed. They passed, and then they got up a little bit, and then they stopped and they backed up.
Sure.
And it was a older woman and her husband, and they actually gave me a ride. And I had asked them, if they could just get me to Millinocket and everything else, and told them, just explained to them that I'm gonna have to get a bus or something, to go to Bangor.
Sure.
And they looked at me, they're like, well, we live in Bangor. Like, we just got up this morning and wanted to find something to do and decided we'd come up here.
Oh, cool.
So they took me all the way to Bangor.
Wow. Trout provides.
Exactly. But what I thought was funny is I had an app on my phone that showed the AT, and it would show you where pretty much where you were and stuff like that. And for whatever reason, I don't even know why, but whenever we was heading towards Bangor, I brought that app up, and I saw the little arrow going south instead of north, and I actually started getting anxiety because it was something so out of the normal for me, at that point, because I had been so used to going north. It was a weird feeling.
So you went back home. How quickly did that post-trail depression get a hold of you? What did you do to combat it at the time?
It was fairly quick to, come on. I just tried to get a job, as quick as I could to, try and keep myself occupied and whatnot. It was hard to get away from the trail life.
Yeah, and you kept reminding yourself by looking at videos, of course, yeah. But then you did something, which is the real reason. Your name was one reason I wanted to interview you, but the other one was you actually took your mother back to the various parts to show her certain bits of the trail or trail towns and trailheads and so on. Tell us about going back to the trail with your mother, what that did for you and what that did for her.
Well, my mom, she was up there in age. She had, some health issues. She had a heart attack several years before and had to have a triple bypass done. She fell and broke her hip, so she had to have a hip replacement and stuff like that. But my mom, she always loved, to travel. She was very adventurous. And when I got done with the trail, I'd taken my DSLR camera with me, and I took well over 2,000 pictures.
Wow.
So whenever I got back and, was showing her the pictures of all the different stuff that, I'd seen, and was telling her about the different places that I had, stopped, and about the hikers and everything else, she mentioned, how she would have loved to have been able to do that, something like that when she was younger and whatnot. So I knew that, she'd never be able to hike the physical trail, per se. So in 2015, May of 2015, I had some vacation time from work. And so I had just planned on going back up to the trail, different places. And I took her along with me. And so I planned, rounded out, where we was going to go and everything. So, her and my sister were the ones that dropped me off at Amicalola during my through hike. So, she had already seen that. So, we started off at, I took her to Neil's Gap and, showed her Velocity and the outfitter store and all that. And we ended up staying at the Blood Mountain Cabins, just down the road there, because I had stayed there in 2012. Sure. Nice. And I happened to get the same cabin that I stayed in, in 2012, which was the Chipmunk cabin. But, I took her to places like Wayabald and Newfound Gap, Montana Dam, Damascus.
Wow.
We stopped by Harper's Ferry, and I actually took her picture in front of the ATC headquarters. So she has her, had her picture taken in front of it, We went to Pine Grove Furnace State Park.
Don't tell me she had half a gallon of ice cream, did she?
No, she done her version, which was a little ice cream bar.
All right.
I done the challenge again while I was there.
Right.
And sadly was still able to do it. But
did she get a taste of the impact the trail had on you? Because I would imagine seeing those places, having seen your photographs, she could understand what you're saying, couldn't she? She's seen those little places you come to. I bet that was a wonderful thing for her to see.
Yeah, she loved it, and we went through the Shenandoah also, And, we done trail magic at several places. We had stopped and I took a huge cooler with me. So we loaded up, drinks and snacks
Sure.
and the ramen noodles and the pasta sides. And we'd stop at, different areas. And so, she, met several of the hikers that were, hiking that year and had her picture taken with them. And I mean, she loved it. She really
Oh
did.
dear. I bet she
So,
did. And funny enough, and I just think that was such a great thing. That is she still with us, or did she
no,
pass?
she passed,
Right.
actually a year later.
Right. What a wonderful thing to share with her, though. What a fantastic thing that to share that with her, because most times I said to people this year, tell everybody your stories and show them your pictures for about 3 weeks. But after about 3 weeks, they're going to want you to shut up because they just don't understand it. You gave your mother that little glimpse of something so she would understand what it was like for you, didn't you? And I think
Oh
that's
yeah.
such an important thing. I bet you're delighted that you did it, obviously.
Oh, yeah. I love it. I mean, I love the fact that, even though it wasn't the wooded trail parts, of the AT,
Yeah.
I can say that I was able to get my mom out there and her
Yeah.
hike some of the trail with me.
Yeah. I think it's very cool. Very cool. So something you said yesterday that when we talked the other day, rather, when you said, when we were discussing this, you said that I finished the trail it says words to this effect. I finished the trail in 2012, but the trail wasn't done with me.
Yeah.
So what have you decided to do?
Well, in 2022, I plan on through hiking the trail again.
Who's foolish enough to go again?
Well, I have to put myself in the same category as you, Mighty Blue. There probably aren't many of us, but yeah, I'm gonna be one of those.
That's
that gets out there
fantastic.
again.
I can tell you, you're gonna love it still. Yeah, you really are. But what was interesting to me also, when you went first time, you weren't married or involved with anybody when you left in 2012.
Right.
But that's changed, isn't it? And I know you're with
Yep.
somebody now.
Yep.
What did your girlfriend think about you going for a second time?
She's very supportive about it. She's all for it. She's like, go. She goes, it's something you enjoy. She goes, she tells me, that there's no way that she's going to, take that from me.
Right. Cool.
She's very supportive of it.
But do you think that the 2022 hike will allow the trail to be finished with you this time? Are you scratching an itch that's always going to be there? Or are you going to want to go again in 2032? Because at your age, you could go in 2032.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it'll ever be done with me, to be honest with you, Mighty Blue.
Yeah.
I mean, I love it so much. I love it.
Did your girlfriend consider going with you? Would she like to go with you?
She talks about it every once in a while, but she's also she likes getting out there and camping, but not for that long. Right.
Right.
To go out and do weekend camps and whatnot. But
you never know. A lot of things can change before now in 2022.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the gear will have been substantial since 2012. Take us back to then. What was your, when you weigh in at Amicalola, could you put, you put your gear on that scale, which I presume they had back in 2012 because it was there in 2014. What was your weigh-in weight?
Yeah, I really couldn't tell you what the weigh-in was because I never actually weighed it.
Oh, right.
All I know is it was a lot heavier than what it is today.
So what sort of gear did you have? What would you have then with you?
Oh God, I went out and I think I bought all the wrong stuff. I wanted to try and do it as cheap as possible. So, I ended up having a Coleman backpack from Walmart that didn't fit.
Wow. Good. Excellent.
Just, anything. And I think it was like a 70-liter backpack. And of course, if there's room, you're going to stuff something in there.
Cool,
so my pack, whenever I started, if I had to guess, I'd probably say it was at least 60 pounds. I ended up getting rid of a lot of stuff, by the time I hit Hiawassee. I sent a lot of stuff home that I knew I wouldn't need. And then whenever I got to Franklin, I ended up buying a different backpack, a smaller one, and sending even more stuff home. By the time I summited Katahdin, I think I had it down to probably about 20, 25 pounds, about 35
Yeah,
pounds with food and water.
that's fine.
But I've since changed everything again, and
Right.
I've got all the Dyneema, stuff sacks and tarp and all that. I think the heaviest thing that I have in my pack right now is my hammock that I use.
Oh, you're a hammocker, right? Okay.
Yeah. Use hammock.
Nice.
I don't know that I could ever go back to the ground again.
Right.
It hurts too much.
I never tried one. It always looks uncomfortable to me. But everybody goes into a hammock that I've ever met says that's the way. No, they would never go back to the ground again. But I just love being in the tent. I really do enjoy being in the tent.
Some people do. I know whenever I was on the trail in 2012, there was a lot of my trail family that actually ended up changing to a hammock because they would, we'd get to a camp or something and they would start to put up their tent. They're trying to find level ground or somewhere where there's not rocks or whatever. And I've already got my hammock set up over some boulders and I'm sitting there eating my supper, so they ended up changing.
Now, you must have thought about one or two things that you probably screwed up in 2012. And by the sound of things, you screwed up quite a bit, as I did as well. Have you decided how you're going to correct those in your next hike? Are you going hot and cold, or what are you going to do that's different this hike to what it was last time?
I think the biggest thing is, my gear, which I've already changed out. But as far as the hike itself, I think in 2012, I knew that there was a deadline to Summit Katahdin before they shut down and everything else. And I didn't want to miss that. So I think there were, sometimes that I would try and put in more miles maybe, or, hike a little faster to make sure that I made that deadline, because it would have killed me if I'd gotten to the end and couldn't Summit Katahdin. Right. So I think this time, probably go a little bit slower, just, and
you go earlier because you didn't actually tell me when you went last time. What time did you start last time?
Yeah, I started March 1st and Summit Katahdin on August 27th.
Oh, right. So that was fine. Yeah. That's fine.
Yeah. So, I had plenty of time, but, for some reason in my mind, I guess, I didn't want to screw anything up to where I couldn't. So,
yeah, I understand.
So, yeah, I could probably start at the same time and, still take my time a little more and still be fine on making it.
Yeah, I must admit, I thought to myself when I went for the second time, I would probably take more time to allow myself to sit on a rock for longer and watch things. But the guy I was hiking with, Trigger, he just wanted to get the miles done. So I found I didn't do it quite as much as I intended to. But you know what? You let the hike unfold and come to you, don't you? You can't take it on. You just cannot take it on, can you? You've got to let it happen.
I think you can try and plan out every day of 6 months, but it's going to be shot in about 3 or 4 days.
Tops.
Something's going to change, and it's going to change, what happens. I mean, because you're never going to be able to predict, the weather or, something like that. So, I mean, you just got to take it as the day gives it to you.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm very excited for you because having done it this second time, I know it's going to be a different journey for you. I'm sure you're going to love it as well. So all I would say is, firstly, thanks for writing to me and thanks for listening to the show. But also, if you do go out and do it still in 2022, just let us know what happens, and we'd love to fill people in on how well you're doing.
Oh, definite.
Okay, buddy. Well, take it easy, all right? And we'll speak again.
I appreciate it, Mighty Blue.
Cheers. Bye. Nice fella, and he was very pleased to be on the show and share his story. As you could probably tell, though, I thought his journey with his mother to various AT spots was a pure delight. What a way to honour your mother, and I'm sure it was some consolation to him that he'd taken the opportunity to do so prior to her sad passing. Now we've got a bit of a podcasters roundtable with me, Anna and Julie making a few current points, and remember, these things can change by the day. I hope you get something out of it. Well, this week on Mighty Blue, we've got two friends, Anna and Julie, who host the other two shows that are currently live. Hi, Anna, you're the trail dame, and hi, Julie, you're Jester, the section hiker.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Steve. Hey, Anna.
So glad to see you guys in person.
It's taken us 23 minutes to try to get this working, so we'll just see how it goes. And we want to talk to you today from Hiking Radio Network about what's going on right now with COVID and how people are responding to it and how badly some people are responding to it. We just want to run through a couple of points that occur to us, and you may or may not agree. And I've got a little list I put together, and the girls have done their own few points as well. So I'll be handing off to one of those soon. I'll start off with a few things. One, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and all the other long trail associations are recommending that people get off the trail. And we always trust the ATC, and I'm talking now about the Appalachian Trail. We always trust the ATC to look after the trail for us. Why on earth would we not trust them to come up with the best advice they can? It's not in their interests to get people off the trail just for the sake of it. They're doing it because it's good for the trail, or they believe it to be good for the trail. There's a number of different reasons, but I'm going to let the ladies also talk about other points as well. Anna, you go first.
Well, it's so interesting. I just want to make sure that everyone listening understands that if there's anybody in the world that's heartbroken to not be able to get out on a trail, it's us three. We understand that more than anybody. And especially like the universe kind of all of a sudden gave us downtime that we didn't already have. My job is closed. All of my other scheduled things have been canceled. So what better thing to do than to go hike? So I understand the frustration that's out there, but I don't think we should be going out and hiking. But I totally just want everyone to understand that we feel you.
Are the trail dames advising their members anything at all, Anna?
Yes. So we, a few weeks ago, we initially canceled everything for the rest of March for probably 2.5 weeks, the last 2.5 weeks of March. We felt like we needed to think nationally because some of our chapters are in places where there's not much of an issue yet. And others are in chapters where there's a real problem in terms of the virus being spread and trail overcrowding and all that good stuff. So, but it just wasn't practical for us to say, you can hike, but you can't. And frankly, I'm not an expert. So what you said to me was really important. I lean on the ATC. I lean on the Pacific Trail Trust Alliance, these organizations that know so much more than me. I trust them. So that's what we did. And we have extended that through April. The only thing we're doing is we're doing online gear discussions, which will be a lot of fun, but it's not hiking.
Yeah, sure.
What we can do to be good members of the trail community.
Yeah. Well, look, I listened to a really good interview by Sandy Marr, the head of the ATC on the trek the other day. And she was pointing out, there are no trail stewards out there at all, no ridge runners, no maintainers. So the place isn't as safe as it once was. I know it means it's wilder, and some people like that idea. First responders, if you get injured, won't be called in. They will be called in. They will come out and help you. But man, do they really need to be doing that? Should you be putting their lives in danger or their health in danger by getting injured and having to be taken off the trail? It makes no sense. And many parks and trailheads are closing. In fact, I think, Anna, you mentioned in Georgia, this virtually shut down the trailheads and everything, aren't they?
It's terrible. We had a situation where all of a sudden people who love the trails just love them to death. Our local Cloudland Canyon, there was a news story that they literally had thousands of people show up on a single day. And the photos, it looks like a rock concert. I've never seen that many people on one trail. And of course, there's no social distancing. There's no groups of less than 10 people. So they were just loving the trails to death. So a great many of our trails are closed. And that is something that just changes every single day. You just can't even keep up with it.
Yeah, and I know you go out for a walk most mornings, Julie, because you often do a live Facebook, don't you, or a live Instagram. What are you seeing out there, and where are you going?
Well, I'm actually currently right now, I am going to my local nature preserve that I have gone to basically since 2002. And right now I go early in the morning when I know I'm not going to see anybody. But just this morning, I have noticed that they had to put out no parking signs. They have literally coned off and roped off areas. And for the first time this morning, I really have the feeling of what a thru hiker feels like. And, I'm a section hiker and, I had a section planned in April that I was going to go out and do on the Appalachian Trail. But just this morning, I was like, they're going to close my local nature preserve.
Sure.
And am I going to rebel against that and go into the park and do different things? And then I started thinking, this is exactly what a thru hiker's going through, whether they're on the Appalachian Trail, whether they're on the PCT, whether they're on getting ready to start their CDT hikes. And it's almost like we're going through different stages of grief as hikers, because 2 weeks ago I was like, nah, I'm still going to go out on the trail. I know different places I can go. And then 2-3 days later, it was like, oh my God, swarms of people in Georgia, swarms of people at McAfee Knob, swarms of people in all different of the favorite areas. And it's like all of a sudden that changed. And now it's affecting us in our local parks, because here in my county, we have a stay-at-home order in the county. And then 24 hours ago, we have a stay-at-home order in North Carolina. So things are changing. It seems every 30 minutes, things are changing.
Yeah. And one of the things I've been very aware of is how much hate there is on both sides of this issue on social media. It is freaking disgraceful. And both sides are as bad as each other, by the way. The ones who think you shouldn't be there, the ones who think you should be there, they're both as bad as each other. But one
Very
thing
true.
that struck me is we've got to show some understanding for those people on the trail who only have this period of time in their life to hike. Some people have put off the rest of their life for that 6-month period. They may never get back to the trail. So, of course, they're going to be slowing coming to, I know, let's call it the right answer. It may not be the right answer. Maybe it's our answer, but maybe the right answer is not to be on the trail, and they're resisting this because this is what they planned for. Imagine planning this for 10 years. You've allocated a period of time, and you cannot ever come out again for all sorts of financial or personal reasons. You've got to say, stop, I can't do it anymore. And I just hope they come to the right answer in their own time, but really as soon as they possibly can, because this is changing daily, and the hikers should be very wary about being trapped and having all that sort of stuff going on. I mean, how do you feel about that part of it, Anna, where someone, and we're talking through hikers now, obviously, someone is through hiking and they've given up so much of their past or their time this year to do this, and at great expense sometimes they're homeless because they've done this. And I've met many people like that. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel like, number one, I truly understand that position, because back in 2003, when I was trying to do my thru hike, I had planned for it for 3 years, rented my house out, quit my job, the entire thing that everyone else does. And 100 miles in, I broke my foot. And so it was one of those things where I felt like all that had completely been taken away from me. I know the frustration. I know the being homeless, having to go back and live with family. And I know that I clawed my way for 8 weeks to a place to where I could go back. So I know that
Sure.
kind of feeling of you've got to find a way to get back. And the thing that I would say to any thru hikers that are listening to this is that there is a good chance that within a couple of months, this could go back to normal. If you can be a little flexible, it doesn't mean maybe that your entire plan has been shot. Because that, again, the three of us will understand that kind of feeling more than anybody too. So, but I just have to say, my overall look at this is that we have an opportunity. We can either think about ourselves or we can think about the community around us. And that's the bottom line. When you decide to hike, regardless of what everyone else is asking you to do, you're only thinking about yourself. Whereas if you could just put yourself in the position of the townspeople of the towns you're going through, the rescue people, all these other people, the children that are watching you, to see whether or not you're going to respect what the AT says or not. This is our opportunity to maybe kind of rise up a little bit and be a little bit better than we necessarily want to be.
Yeah, I'd say my heart is sick for those people, because I know some people just can't do that. But if they can, once they get out on the trail, because every single one of my interviews, people say it's the people, it's the community, and that's what we all feel. It is the community. So you are helping people, and I offered anybody to come on and disagree with me last week on the show. So far, nobody's actually called me and said they disagree, because perhaps they can't be bothered to argue with me. But I'm not going to argue with anybody. I understand why everybody. I literally understand everybody's point of view on this. But I think it comes back to trusting that the ATC would not be closing this or asking people to get off unless it was really, really important. I mean, blowdowns aren't getting cleared right now. I mean, that's going to be tough for people. And going into nearby towns endangers not only you, and frankly, that's less important because it endangers the local community. That's another bad thing. You think you're not going to pass it on. Well, you may well pass it on. And you may be the origin of an outbreak in Hot Springs or whatever it is. And you're going to feel terrible about that, or you should feel terrible about that. But Julie, you've been talking about positivity, and I know you're a very upbeat sort of person. And bearing in mind, I don't understand any of this crap. You've got a hashtag, which I didn't even know what it was in the past, but okay. I used to call it a pound sign. Tell us about hashtag HRN spread positivity.
Well, first and foremost, one thing that has come out of this very positive is listeners and I have been talking back and forth, and we've been reaching out to each other on, down in the DMs or whatever you want to call it on Instagram. And I've actually talked to other podcasters, and I started this thing where I am voicemailing people. And I did it to Steve and some other people. You can leave people 30-second messages. Hey, I was thinking about you. I saw your feed on the Instagram, and Steve tried to do it back, and somehow we got messed up. But, and then
that's the problem putting any technology in the hands of a 67-year-old bloke.
And one of the listeners that I've actually gotten pretty close with through social media, and she's been on the show, Maria Wishart, aka we all call her Wheezy P, and she lives in Duncannon, Pennsylvania, and she's very vocal. And she and I, have been talking back and forth. Let's start spreading positivity out of this. We all agree that the hatred on social media is ridiculous, on both sides. Yeah. Everybody has their own opinion. And what we want to start doing is having people tag us in their post. And it's just simply pound, as Steve calls it, or hashtag HRN spread positivity. And specifically on Instagram, you can use it on Twitter. I don't know what happens when you use a hashtag on Facebook, but on Instagram, tag us in your post. I know the Trail Dames will start doing that with their posts. And it's just, this is how we're going to get through this. And, reach out to your favorite hostel, leave them a message, reach out to your, favorite owner of a small business, leave them a message. This is a time where we can still contact each other because of social media. I mean, look at Zoom. Everybody is Zooming. Like, Zoom was not around 3 weeks ago. Now we're all Zoom. So there are ways to reach out to people and go through Instagram, go through social media, pick up your cell phone, call people. Because the number one thing we do on the trail is, I know when I go out on the trail, I am talking for 12 hours. I mean, I can literally talk for 12 hours to somebody off the trail, and we don't have that right now.
That's an amazing female capacity, by the way, that men just don't have. I just have no idea what you're talking about.
I have to tell you that Julie's going to be on the Trail Days podcast in the next few weeks, and I think that it could be the record for like the longest podcast conversation ever.
I'm going to edit this. You're going to keep. Cut off at 4 hours. Cut off at 4 hours. Well, look, listen. I think we should do this again if it's deemed necessary, or we feel it's necessary. I think it hopefully gives people some idea of what we're thinking. We'd love to know what you think on any of our shows. Anna show's Trail Dames podcast, Julia show's Just a Section Hiker, and my show obviously is Mighty Blue on the AT. Just let us know what you're thinking, and if you agree with us or you disagree with us. We're happy to have anybody disagree with us, but because no one's right in this. Just people have opinions. Unfortunately, we're not trying to be prescriptive to anybody. Do what you think is right. And I think one of the things we all have is some shared value of what is right. And it may well be we're disagreeing on what that is. But we want those trails to continue and hopefully make them available for people next year. But I appreciate you guys taking the time out to waste half hour before we actually got on the online. And maybe we'll do this again, okay?
Hey, Steve, could I add one thing?
Of course.
This is something that we're putting in the beginning of the Trail Days podcast. This is a fabulous time. When you're listening to these podcasts, if you hear a guest that you like, or of course a host that you like, you can reach these people on social media all day, every day. It's amazing how connected we all are. Yeah. And I'm telling everyone, get out there and start planning your next trip. Read some books. Reach out to the authors of those books. They're all on Facebook. They're all on Instagram. And so instead of sitting at home being all frustrated that we can't hike, we can really kind of dive into the social media and the communication part of hiking, like Julia was saying, because I think what you said was brilliant. So that we can make something positive out of this.
Yeah. Be nice.
Be nice.
Be nice. All right. Okay, girls. I'll speak to you soon, okay?
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you, sweetie.
Cheers. By the way, once we finish, Anna wanted to point out that she is, in fact, never wrong. So apologies for insinuating that she may be on occasion. And on the social media stuff, don't be so harsh upon people who are struggling with the decision to leave the trail. I truly understand their reticence. If you want to disagree with any of this, please remember that you can come on the show and make your point if you so wish. Just email me at steve@hikingradionetwork.com and we'll arrange a conversation on the show. By the way, many of you probably remember Jason Woods, who was on the show last week and still on the trail. Now, one or two of you weren't too happy about that, but, well, he texted me a couple of days ago to let me know that, regretfully, though entirely consistent with the pragmatic approach that he had last week, he's left the trail. He says in the text, just didn't see a way to keep hiking with everything going on. Driving back to Cleveland tomorrow, I'm going to consider a flip-flop. I do hope you get the chance to get back on, Jason. Now that you've had us three podcasters pontificating about the virus, let's hear from a real doctor living it. Here's Dr. Lynne. Well, we've got an old friend of the show on here today, and she probably will hate being referred to as an old friend of the show, but a friend of the show. This is Dr. Lynne. Hi, Lynne. How are you?
I am doing just great. You can't see the big smile on my face right now, but I'm just so excited to be talking with you again and being part of this podcast. It's really terrific.
Oh, it's lovely. Well, you came and obviously hiked with me last year. And that was a lovely day. And you bought us these, can't remember what it was. You bought us some buns and some burgers, I think it was, or some food. And we sat and had a picnic, didn't we? on the back of your car, me, you, and Trigger. Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah. I bought you breakfast that
That's
morning.
Right.
Some breakfast sandwiches. We sat out by the road and had breakfast, and then we hiked together. And it was just such a fabulous day.
It really was.
Fun day. And
but now we're talking about a different time, aren't we? Isn't it amazing how the world seems to have flipped upside down? And what we're trying to do on the podcast is give our listeners and hikers any information that they can get. And I thought, obviously, you being a doctor, you'd have an insight into this. So I wonder whether you could, if I asked you a few questions, I know I've already told Lynne what the questions are. But I just, for my own edification as much as anything as well, what exactly is COVID-19 and why is it different from the flu?
COVID-19 is a virus that attacks essentially the respiratory system. The flu can attack the respiratory system, which is the lungs, the throat. For instance, other viruses could attack the gastrointestinal system, the stomach, the intestines, causing diarrhea. So COVID-19 is a virus that attacks the respiratory system.
But isn't it one of the symptoms of COVID diarrhea as well?
It is. It's one of the secondary symptoms.
Right.
And there's a difference between, the symptoms versus what organs are actually being attacked by the virus itself. There's fever, there's cough, there's shortness of breath, there's lack of taste and smell. Yeah. There is some gastrointestinal, there's some diarrhea, there's some vomiting.
Right.
But the most common and the most severe symptoms are usually due to respiratory. One of the caveats, though, is with this virus, it can trigger a very intense immune response where you can get what's called multi-system organ failure.
Oh my gosh! None of that sounds good. None of that sounded good at all.
Yeah, I mean that all your organs now are starting to be attacked, and that's where the most serious cases and the highest fatality rate is happening. Is when every organ is working hard and is being attacked. A lot of times people will just succumb because the body just can't handle all of that onslaught all at once.
When this first happened, there wasn't, there were people will argue, I'm not going to get involved in the politics of this at all, but people will argue whether our response was good, bad, or indifferent. It doesn't matter because it's here now. But very quickly, we seem to see that this was much more serious than, say, the annual flu outbreak. Do you have any insights into why that was? Was it because it was that type of virus that we knew, or doctors knew, or scientists knew this was going to attack something in a way the flu wouldn't?
So the reason that they were worried about that this was much more serious is twofold. Number one was this is a new virus that the human race has never seen before. So we've never developed any kind of immunity to it. So we didn't know how our bodies would respond and how we would develop immunity and whether or not it would mutate and reinfect. The other problem is that it has a higher mortality rate than the regular flu. And so
do we know that's true?
I
mean, that's interesting to me.
Actually, yes.
Can I just ask that question from a different point of view? Because the death's relatively low now, although they were talking tonight about even if we do as best we can do, it's going to end up being between 100,000 and 240,000 deaths, which is staggering to me. But because we don't know exactly how many people have got it, how do we calculate a death rate?
So right now, the risk for death, I'm actually reading this here it just came up on my email just this evening.
All right.
Through the website Medscape. Mm-hmm. The risk for death is 1.38% overall. Now, what that means is they have people who have been tested positive. That's the denominator, and people who have died, that's the numerator.
Right.
So we don't know if the death rate is actually less because I'm sure there are people out there that have not been tested, but that is the number of people who have been tested versus the number of people who have actually died.
But almost by definition, doesn't it seem reasonable that the denominator must be more than it currently is? Almost by definition.
Oh, no question.
Yeah.
No question.
Right.
Absolutely.
But it is still considerably more than the flu. So, I mean, it does seem to be as well. So, and I know social distancing, great expression I'd never heard of before, has been proven in the past to have worked well. But I was reading today also that hand washing is possibly even more important. So is that true, or is social distancing still the number one best measure?
Well, sure. Both of them are actually very important. And I'm not sure that you can put one without the other. But social distancing, as most of us know, is staying 6 feet apart or more if you're having an interaction with a person. Let's say, though, that you went to the store and you were in there and you happened to be at the cash register and you were the first one in the cash register, like nobody was in front of you. Nobody was, people were far away from you.
Sure.
You don't know, though, who was there before you, maybe a couple of minutes before, and they were punching the keys on the cash register and they had COVID on their hands. Then you go up to the cash register and you punch the keys, and now then you have a scratch or an itch, on your face, and you scratch your face with your hand, and it gets into your system that way.
Wow.
So that's why hand washing is really important as well. Or if you don't have hand washing, Purell.
Yeah, well,
that's what you should do.
Well, I shared with you before we actually started recording that I'm not feeling at all well tonight, and I've as we've been speaking, I'm getting hotter and hotter. My temperature is getting worse, so I hope to gosh I haven't got it, but you just never know, do you? And should we be using our buffs because we all wore buffs when we were out hiking. So to bring it back to the hiking analogy, but as I understand it, if you wear those buffs, you're really wearing them to protect others from you as opposed to protect yourself from others. Is that correct?
That is correct. I am actually using my buffs at work. I love the fact that I can take a little bit of the trail with me to work every day. I take my buffs, and the reason I use my buffs is we are now allotted a certain a mask once a day. And it can be either a regular mask, or if we're going in to actually see a high-risk patient, we do use one of those N95 masks. But we're not supposed to be disposing of them. And they're fine for protection. But the reason we use our buffs is we cover those masks with our buffs to prevent them from becoming soiled in the event that, we're doing a procedure or something like that, so that we don't have to worry about throwing the mask out every time they get soiled. And then the buffs can be taken home and washed.
Are you relatively comfortable with that?
Yes.
You are. You know what? That's a good enough answer for me, because it must be scary. I mean, you hear all sorts of bad news on the news. You want to make sure somebody who's actually doing it there, has an opinion on it and thinks it, is certainly doable. So where are you spending your working days? Are you in hospital every day?
So I actually spend my working days in a nursing home. With the most vulnerable population out there for COVID.
Yeah.
So we are really diligent about our, what we call PPE, personal protective equipment, and about our hand washing, and about making sure that patients are isolated properly. I'm very fortunate that in our nursing home, we do not have any COVID patients.
Right.
And I just found out this afternoon that our nursing home has been slated to stay a non-COVID nursing home. So basically what's happening is they're going to be converting some nursing homes to COVID-only patients.
Oh, my gosh.
Those nursing homes those nursing homes who already have COVID patients are going to continue to receive COVID patients from the hospitals. But the nursing homes that do not have current COVID cases are at this point going to remain non-COVID patients, non-COVID nursing homes. And we will be absorbing the non-COVID transfers from either other nursing homes or from the hospitals.
Well, that's good news. I guess that's good news, isn't it?
Two separate. It's very good news for those patients who are not infected, and it will be, their risk of developing an infection or acquiring an infection will be much less.
That's good.
And it'll be good for the patients who are infected, because then the supplies, the necessary equipment can be streamlined over to those COVID nursing homes.
Of course, yeah. So do you see signs of hope for, say the next 2 months? We're going to be under not lockdown, but sort of lockdown till the end of April by the sound of things. And by the way, this is Tuesday night we're recording this, Tuesday the 31st of March. So we've got another 30 days. Do you see signs of hope, say, for the end of May or June, or what signs of hope can you give us?
It's difficult to say for the entire country, because every part of the country has a different timeline.
Sure.
For instance, the New York metro area, which is where I am, I'm about an hour and a half north of New York City. Our timeline is very intense right now.
Yeah, I bet.
And they expect to have a peak in about 2 weeks, and then hopefully turn the corner. Doesn't mean that we won't have any more cases. We'll have newer cases, but it will be at a much less rapid pace. And we'll be able to keep up with things. Whereas other parts of the country, more the Midwest, the Southwest, and especially the rural areas, have not yet had their peak for COVID.
Right.
And that may actually be a good thing for them, because they'll have more time to prepare.
Yes.
But their peak will be later.
So as you see it then, say that peak happens, say it's the 14th of April, let's say it's 14th of April, and the increase is it just the increase goes down, or the actual number, the peak means the actual number start going down? the deaths will be a lagging indicator, won't they? They'll be lagging behind that. So how much longer do you think you will still need to socially distance and all those things? In other words, what's the tail like? Is the tail longer than the...
I couldn't I couldn't even begin to tell you. I'm not even going to begin to speculate. Okay. My own family is, especially my kids. How much longer?
Yes, I bet. I bet. Yeah.
Are we there yet? That's the big question. Are we there yet? And at this point, we don't know.
And there are so many different follow-up things to this, aren't there? That people staying inside, going stir crazy. I mean, I regard myself as one of the lucky few. I'm my girlfriend and I are in separate places, but at the end of the day, I'm pretty comfortable. I've got a decent place, got a roof over my head, I've got food, I've got a pension, so I get that paid. But some people are going to be really, really struggling with this, and that desire to go out will be so strong once people start thinking it's getting better. And so really, they're going to be careful. I think, from my point of view, then they need to be very careful how they reintroduce less social distancing going forward, because I don't think this is just going to be over just like that at the end of June, is it?
Yeah, that's correct. The bars and the restaurants and the parks and the gyms and the rec centers are all going to open up, but they're still going to have very, very careful distancing. They might need to limit the number of people coming in. A lot of places were doing a lot more careful cleaning and disinfecting, and I think that is going to stay that way. But they're going to have to. They're going to have to open just a little bit at a time to see how things go and to prevent a resurgence of this pandemic.
Yeah. Well, look, I really appreciate you coming on. I know you're so darn busy, and I saw a post by your daughter the other day, how proud she was of you. And I'm so proud to have been associated with you, through the show and having met you as well. You and your husband, great people. We had a lovely dinner as well, and we hiked together. This show has made me so many great friends. I really count you as one of the very best friends I've met on the show. And I just hope you stay safe, Lynne.
Well, thanks so much. I just want to add one little fun anecdote that has nothing to do with COVID, but I thought that your podcast listeners would love to hear this. It was just adorable.
Yes.
You and Trigger, I picked you guys up and I dropped you off at the hotel, and you needed to get your laundry done. So we found a place that did a wash, dry, fold. We dropped you off. We dropped your laundry off, and then we all went off to eat. We had a marvelous evening, and then we went to go pick up your laundry. And I sat in the car, and you guys went in and got your laundry. And darn it, if you didn't come out with, the finest tuxedo you could possibly imagine. Here's your hiking clothes. They were pressed. They were hung on a hanger with the plastic dry cleaning bag over it. I just thought it was the funniest thing in the world to treat those clothes with such
we felt like kings.
It was great. It really made me smile, and I really wanted to let your listeners know that little fun story.
Oh dear. Well, that's so cool. That's so cool. Well, as I say, please stay careful, stay safe, and let me know. You know what? I'd love to chat to you again in a couple of weeks' time, because this is going to develop quite fast. So perhaps if you're around, we'll talk again in a couple of weeks' time.
I'd love to do that. Absolutely. Just let me know and be happy to come back on.
Lovely. All right then, Lynne. I'll speak to you soon, all right?
All right. You take care. Feel better.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Lynne is one of the people you meet in life who, as you're about to actually meet them for the first time, you have a view of what they're like. Yet she is just as lovely as she sounds and just as friendly. And being a doctor, I always feel comfortable reaching out to ask her about stuff, and hope that we can have her back on the show soon. Finally today, Grandma Gatewood continues her hike and shares some of her harrowing past. I'd forgotten quite how tough her life had been prior to this hike, so it's further testimony to the healing properties of walking, and a long trail in particular. I'll see you next week. Chapter 6. Our Fight. June the 23rd to July the 5th, 1955. Her feet were a sight. Start with the toes, which were chipped and battered and appeared almost as though she had been kicking rocks. The middle three on each foot hooked permanently downward, almost vertical from the second joint to the tip, from being scrunched into too small shoes for too long a time. Her small toes deviated toward the centre, and on the outside of both feet were large bunions. The most astonishing thing about her feet, though, were her big toes, which jutted toward the centre at a 45-degree angle from her instep. Protruding from the spot where the metatarsal meets the phalange on her insteps were bulbous bunions the size of ball bearings. Her feet themselves were wide and flat and covered with veins like the lines on a map, and they ran shapelessly into oversized ankles, then up to a narrow, battered, hourglass-curved shins and toward grotesque, gibbous knees, surrounded by unnatural, tumorous outthrusts. Hers were well-worn legs, and she hid her feet inside sneakers and her knees inside dungarees, both of which were getting wetter by the minute. She made her way along the rugged trail in a late June downpour, over the Priest, elevation 4,063 feet, one of the highest gains in Virginia. She tramped down across the foaming cascades of the Tye River and on to Reed's Gap, where she lost her rain hat. She walked back a piece to find it, but had no luck. She was soaked to the bone by the time she found a man milking a cow beside the trail. His name was Campbell, and she asked about a place to stay. He invited her back to his house, which was way down over a hill from the trail. The woman of the house, Sis Campbell, was in her 80s, and the house looked much older than her, and its furnishings seemed to have been original. Sis Campbell led Emma upstairs by candlelight, as the old home had no electricity. The next morning was beautiful, and she walked north through central Virginia. Some passer-by mentioned a restaurant, a Howard Johnson's, in the vicinity of Waynesboro to the north, and she spent much of the day's hike thinking about hot food. She stopped at the first house to ask for directions. The family, Mr. and Mrs. E.B. Ricks, were very nice and invited her in to rest. Their home was lovely. They had a flagstone courtyard and the prettiest view of the valley Emma could imagine. They were taken by her stories and asked Emma to stay for supper. Mrs. Ricks, in particular, wouldn't stop with the questions. After Emma went to bed, she phoned the News Virginian of Waynesboro. The next morning they drove Emma the few miles into town. She had breakfast at a restaurant, then went to the drugstore for a few items, then headed across the street and waited for another store to open so she could buy a new pair of slacks, a raincoat and some new shoes. She had just started to shop when a man saw her and hurried toward her, grinning ear to ear. "I'm from the newspaper," he said. They'd found her again. The reporter had phoned Mrs. Ricks, and she told him that Emma was in the store shopping for shoes. Emma didn't mind so much this time. Word was out, after all. She answered all the man's questions. Emma told him about her pack, how she had made it herself. He held it and figured it weighed about 12 pounds when full. He asked her how she had stayed warm on cold nights with no sleeping bag. She told him about heating flat rocks over a fire and reclining on them for warmth. She told him she couldn't sleep many nights for fear of bears. She hadn't seen one yet, but she'd seen plenty of signs they were around. She told him about the rattlesnake and that there weren't enough shelters along the trail and that she thought she'd finish by late September, depending on how well I get along. She told him about the trail magic and how welcoming some folks had been. "I've found a lot of lovely people who have taken me in for a night's lodging and food," she said. "I've also found some who didn't care to have me around." He asked her impressions so far, and she couldn't help herself. That National Geographic article made the journey seem so easy. "I've found the hike more rugged than I had heard," she said. When the interview was over, she bought a raincoat, shoes, socks and some food and headed off again toward the trail, then toward Sawmill Shelter. That afternoon, the story ran on the front page of the News Virginian, beneath the fold, under the headline, "Woman 67, hiking from Georgia to Maine, arrives in Waynesboro." Many persons take to the easy chair when they reach the age of 67 years, but this is not the case for Mrs. Emma Gatewood of Gallipolis, Ohio. Mrs. Gatewood, the mother of 11 children whose ages range from 27 to 47, on May the 3rd began to hike the 2,050-mile-long Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine. Since May the 3rd, the 67-year-old woman has hiked 900 miles. The reporter asked Emma if she'd like for him to mail a clipping of his piece to the family in Ohio, 300 miles due west of the spot where she was standing. "The folks at home," she said, "don't know where I am." She could hide in the woods, always. "I've always done a lot of walking in the woods," she'd tell a newspaper reporter years later. "The stillness and quiet of the forests has always seemed so wonderful, and I like the peacefulness." Some people thought she was crazy, but she found a certain restfulness that satisfied her nature. The woods made her feel more contented. She was comfortable there. especially when her home was ruled by a tyrant. In later years, she would confide in her children that their father not only blacked her eyes and blooded her lips, but that his sexual appetite was insatiable. He demanded she submit to him several times a day. They didn't know it then, but they were used to their mother seeking haven in their beds in the quiet of night, because she couldn't bear to lie next to him. The children saw what he did to her, and they'd carry the memories into their old age. The muffled noises that pierced the night, the bruises on her face, the trajectory of her waning patience. Rowena, the fifth-born, would always remember her mother silhouetted in an upstairs window, looking out, when a hand grabbed her hair and cast her to the floor. She would remember screaming and her older sister slapping her face to make her stop. Louise would remember her father telling her mother she was crazy and punching her in the face with his fist. Lucy, the youngest, would remember hearing her cry and running upstairs to find her father on top of her mother, his hands around her throat, her face turning black. Nelson would remember finding his father beating his mother and lifting his father off her long enough for her to run away into the woods. They'd carry the whispers with them, that he spent his money, their money, fulfilling his desires on 2th Street in Huntington, West Virginia, that he had convinced the neighbours that his wife's complaints were the complaints of an insane person. Even when he broke a broom over her head, he could convince others that he really loved her. Multiple times I was black and blue in a lot of places, but mostly my face, she wrote later. I did not carry one single child that I did not get a slapping or beating during that time, and several times he put me outside and told me to go. It was one grand nightmare to live with him and his maniacal temper. He would act so innocent and pretend he had not touched me and say I was not in my right mind and they would have to do something with me. He even asked me what asylum I wanted to go to, and I told him Athens or OHE or any place would be better than home. She sometimes fought back, which was also part of her nature, and she could hold her own. One story would be told for years to come. Emma and PC were fighting, and the farmhands were working outside. She bolted out of the house and ran around behind a wagon full of corn and scrambled up onto the produce. PC came out right behind her with purpose, and he grabbed a hoe that was leaning against the house. One of the hands stopped him. "You're going to kill her," he said. "Let him alone," Emma shouted. "This is our fight." As their relationship deteriorated, their financial difficulties were multiplying. PC wrote to his well-heeled cousin, Maybelle McIntyre, in 1935, asking for a loan to save the farm, but she would not lend him money. "Can't the farm board, which has such things in hand, do something about it?" she wrote. PC shared pieces of his domestic troubles with his cousin, who lived in New York and was married to O.O. McIntyre, one of the most famous writers of the time, whose New York Day by Day columns ran in some 500 newspapers. Maybelle hired PC in 1937 to renovate a home in Gallipolis, and when he went over the budget she had outlined, he blamed the conflicts at home. "Naturally, you must know I'm very sympathetic with your domestic troubles," Maybelle responded in November 1937. "But sorry as I am, it just must not enter into this business deal. If you are too troubled to get down to the reports, someone must get them to me. That is business, nothing else." 3 weeks later, he had paid the bills and made amends. "I feel sure if you had not had your troubles at home, you would have made the reports as you went along, and there would have been no worry on either side," Maybelle wrote. "However, I'm glad it's over, and I hope your affairs there will soon clear up." They did not clear up. Through it all, the woods were Emma's respite. Sometimes she'd walk away and be gone all day, or long enough at least for his mood to shift. The forest inspired her. She wrote poetry about springtime, about the rills frolicking and zephyrs gently swaying, about the bloodroots and windflower and the hepaticas deep within the forest. She wrote of the Ohio River bends and a romantic tugboat landing. She wrote of Christmas time and of being alone. Some of her poetry was dark and seemed to speak to how she was feeling about her relationship. She got her man, she has him roped. His tongue hangs out as though he's choked. She's sort of scared, her hair's a wreck. She has a foot right on his neck. Dames get desperate in times like these, when men are scarce and hard to please. This was a lot, and she could manage until she felt she could not. He had been so cruel, she didn't know whether she'd survive another beating. As the winter of 1937 set in, she told the children who were still living at home that she loved them and would send for them. She gave the older children instructions to take care of the younger ones, and she told them to always look out for each other. And then she slipped away. The trail through the beautiful Shenandoah National Park in Virginia was good. Its long, gentle ascents not nearly as taxing as the previous 1,000 miles of mountains. The weather was even better. She put in 21 miles on June the 28th and 20 on June the 29th, fueled primarily by wild black raspberries, and on June the 30th, after a good morning hike and a lunch at the Big Meadows Lodge, she bumped into a Boy Scout troop at a nearby campground. When the boys learned where she had been and what she was doing, they wanted a picture and autograph, and she obliged. She felt a little like a celebrity. She found shelter on Hawksbill Mountain and caught some sleep, despite the black flies that pestered her through the night. She started at 5:30 a.m. the next day and was making good time through the narrow 100-mile-long park. The trail often ran alongside old stone field walls, and Emma had pictured someone riding in a carriage behind 4 horses. These hills had been home to Native Americans for thousands of years before European settlers began encroaching from the east, which started soon after an expedition crossed the Blue Ridge Mountains in the early 1700s. Many of the settlers came from Pennsylvania and staked out farms in the lowlands, and as prime property grew scarce, they moved up into the mountains, clearing the land, hunting and trapping game and raising livestock. They made a life for themselves there for hundreds of years, until the 1920s, when academics began to explore the social problems of the region: illiteracy, poverty, illegitimacy, sanitation. Grand plans were launched to move the people off the mountains, pave the ridge, and transform the land into something tourists from eastern cities might enjoy riding through. In 1926, Congress authorized the establishment of Shenandoah National Park, and the state began acquiring land, at times forcing people to move against their will. In 1936, President Franklin D. Roosevelt's Civilian Conservation Corps began building stone bridges, shelters, and lodges, and their handiwork was something to behold. The park was opened that year, and what once were pastures soon blossomed with the makings of what would become a mature wilderness. Emma laid eyes on Skyland, a mountain resort opened in the 1890s by a gregarious businessman with a showman's flair, who invited city dwellers to get away from their urbanized, mechanized lives. The private resort had since been taken over by the park, but its lodges, which seemed to her to be made of bark, remained open to guests. She trudged on toward Maryland at a good clip, and on July the 4th, not far from Ashby Gap, she found $3 beside the road. It was getting dark, so she used the lucky bills to get a room at a motel and ate 5 pieces of fried chicken, a feast. She finally crossed into Maryland, into a tiny town called Sandy Hook, which was just a smattering of houses alongside the railroad tracks, not far from the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. She introduced herself to Anna Fleming, who invited Emma to stay the night. That evening, around dusk, she hiked up to Maryland Heights and sat on a cliff looking down upon the picturesque little town of Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. 170 years before, Thomas Jefferson called the view one of the most stupendous scenes in nature. In a book first published in France, he wrote that the scene alone, the passage of the Potomac River through the Blue Ridge and its crashing merger with the Shenandoah, was worth a trip across the Atlantic. The town below her breathed history, from the narrow brick streets and proud little buildings to the church spires and hilltop cemetery. It was the place the abolitionist John Brown believed he could spark a revolution, to turn the tide of slavery in the South and redeem an oppressed people down the barrel of a Sharp's carbine. The state of Virginia hanged him for treason. His raid, though, was a catalyst for the Civil War, during which Harper's Ferry changed hands 8 times in battles, the last of which came 91 years to the day before Emma sat upon her cliff. It was, as both sides knew, a portal to invasion, and later still, it was the place where W.E.B. Du Bois and his peers launched the Niagara Movement, which would become the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People. So much change and inhumanity for one little place, so much bloodshed and cleansing, death and rebirth. The scene was beautiful, she wrote in her journal. Then, on the day after Independence Day, she stood to her feet and walked back down the trail.